What's up, everybody? You know who I am. You know what this is. It's Tuesday night, and it's turned into Tuesday nights with Larry Krueger for us the last 2 or 3 Tuesdays. Usually, we're talking about, the 49ers' previous playoff win, and we're previewing the upcoming opponent. Unfortunately, we're unable to do that today because 49ers season is officially over. Larry, what's up? How are you?
Good, Vish, man. Good to see you. Yeah, very frustrating weekend watching the Niners. I don't think I've ever seen a less enjoyable game than that game. I mean, that was no fun at all. After the 49ers sixth offensive play, it was pretty much, you
Yeah,
kind
I'll
of knew
shoot
that, at
out.
least I knew, without Brock Purdy, they were not going to win. So then it was just about how would they lose. And that's a long time to dedicate in a game that you had hopes of going to the Super Bowl after winning, to see six plays and then have to, just kind of sit there. You couldn't walk away from it. It was like a slow car crash that you
Right.
knew was coming, and you had to invest 2.5 hours in. And it was just I've never felt worse watching a football game than I did you know, I watched Joe Montana get knocked out by Jim Burt. I saw the 49ers, or saw the New York Giants knock out Montana on multiple occasions in the Meadowlands. And one time of course, at Candlestick as well. But all of those were way better games than this. This was like, you got to be kidding me. And it's interesting because now here we are in the post-mortem, and there's all kinds of people with all kinds of questions, but it seems like the questions I have and the questions that they have are different questions. So I'll be interested to see what you have to say about the game. But I'm not fired up on Kyle Shanahan needs to be fired. I really don't see it that way, but there are obviously people that are so frustrated they want to take out their frustrations on somebody, and they want somebody to answer for this, whatever that means. And there's just the name of the game. There's a lot of passionate people who watch the NFL, and unfortunately, you win some, you lose some. But I didn't see the grounds for firing Shanahan as some would have thrown out there.
Yeah, the last part of it, I don't buy it. I'm not here really for that discussion. I guess maybe the difference between me and others, even though I don't believe in it, I don't think they should fire him. If you can make good points, I will entertain the discussion just because I think it's worth engaging if you can make valid football points why he should be fired. I feel like if you wrote it down on paper and you did the pros and the cons, because there are cons with Shanahan. He's not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But I think the pros far outweigh the cons right now. And the organizational structure that him and John Lynch created, I feel like, a lot of people said in my post game show after the game that, he'll never win a Super Bowl and stuff like that. I don't really look at it that way. I mean, they've been so close. I mean, only one team wins the Super Bowl every year. If you're getting yourself that close, right, that means you're capable of doing it. You have to find a way to ultimately get the job done. I don't know. I don't really buy that one. And then just some of the conversation in regarding to after the game. Obviously, I don't want to linger too much there. It was a disappointing game, but kind of my post-game thought, since you and I haven't discussed it yet, was really exactly what you talked about, right? 6 plays into the game, we knew they didn't have a chance. The moment Brock Purdy got hurt, the game felt over. And I think the most disappointing thing to me that went beyond the 49ers was that as a football fan, I was disappointed to not be able to see those two teams really lay it out there. I thought the Niners had a really good plan on defense. I thought their defense was going to have a really good game. And I thought the Eagles defense had a really good plan for the Niners offense. They were sitting early on a lot of those in-breaking routes and driving on them. And so I think it would have been a really, really, really intriguing battle if Purdy had stayed healthy. A lot of people think the result's foregone, right? Some Niners fans think the Niners would have won. Eagles fans think the Eagles would have won. I don't look at it like that. I really thought these were two excellent teams, Larry, as you know. We talked about it a lot last week. I thought these were two of the best teams in the NFC for a while. I thought both rosters were really, really special and really stacked, Larry. And I was really disappointed that we didn't get to see it play out. And that's where the Niners season to me feels a little bit inconclusive. Like, ultimately the 2019 team I had to come to terms with, and I understood that team didn't win the Super Bowl, and I understood the reasons why they didn't win the Super Bowl because I saw them play out. Same thing last year. This year, I didn't get to find out why this team didn't win the Super Bowl. I didn't get to find out why this team lost to Philadelphia in Philadelphia because their quarterback got hurt. And God bless Josh Johnson. He's made a great career for himself and all of that. But the NFC Championship game at Philadelphia, that moment against that team was way out of his league. It was way out of his league.
Well, and should have even been there. I mean, why did they had Jacob Eason. They cut Jacob Eason and signed Josh Johnson. Why?
I mean, the veteran, right? And that's where I thought it was a little bit disappointing not to linger too much on Josh Johnson. He is not a topic today or yesterday or even during the game, to be honest. But the one disappointing thing I had watching him is if I had one expectation for Josh Johnson, it was that he would do all the veteran stuff, right? He would get you lined up. He would get you in and out of the huddle. And he was unable to do that, right? The 3 delay of game penalties. They had issues getting the ball snapped. They had issues lining up. They had a lot of problems. And then, of course, the most elementary thing a quarterback can do, catch the snap. He was unable to do that as well. And so I don't want to blame him, Larry. I feel like you can parse at it, right? Why was Josh Johnson in there? Why wasn't it Cam Newton? Why wasn't it Mike Glennon? Why wasn't it Jacob Eason? None of those guys, Larry, they were all fourth-string quarterbacks that were available when the Niners had 2 quarterbacks injured for a reason. And that reason was that none of those guys were capable of pulling the NFC Championship game out of the fire against that Philadelphia team, which I don't think people really realize. Larry, I think we tried to talk about it last Tuesday, and a lot of people ignored us. And then a lot of people look at how the Niners D played them, and they're like, oh, Philadelphia's overrated. Philadelphia's not that good. No. Philadelphia's really good. The Niners D is also really, really good. That's why they made it tough for them. And, when you talk about their pass rush, the number of guys that have had 10-plus sacks, the 70 sacks on the year, they are a truly loaded and fantastic football team. And, yeah, that's where I mean,
there's no question they have a lot of talent. And I don't think they played the same way they would have played if Purdy hadn't gone out. So, that's why it's like one of those things. It's like once Purdy went out, the whole game just can't really be evaluated because how Philly probably changed their game plan at that point once they realized the 49ers had no ability to pass. And, Philly had 44 runs and 25 passes. Would they have, the Niners did a nice job defending the pass for the most part. But did they, or did Philly just kind of, they targeted Devontae 3 times, he caught 2 balls. They targeted AJ Brown 8 times, he caught 4 balls. They targeted Goddard 6 times, he caught 5 of the 6. How would those guys have done if they'd been targeted
3.5 yards a carry?
Yeah, 3.5 yards a carry is a good job against the run.
Right.
But Gainwell, did have a 17-yard run.
Hurts had one big one that they missed a couple tackles.
Yeah. So, the bummer of this game is we'll never know. I personally think the 49ers were the better team. If Purdy had been healthy, if he had played the full game, how would it have looked? I don't know. But I think the 49ers would have won. But you know what? They didn't win. And, there were other aspects of this game. You can't win when you commit that many penalties. They committed a ton of penalties in week 1. They committed a ton of penalties in this game. And you can't win when you don't force turnovers.
Right. And you turn it over.
Yeah.
I completely agree with I completely agree with both points. And I also think there's also just a fan perception that's been a little bit skewed, right? Because the Niners have already dealt with quarterback injuries in this season, and they've seemingly been able to shrug them off, right? The initial injury from Lance, then you had Garoppolo come in, and Garoppolo did play at a high level, maybe the highest level Garoppolo has ever played, honestly, in his career, given the fact that he was a little bit more ballsy throwing the football down the field, and he didn't turn it over as much, and he had, brought down his turnover-worthy plays. And I think it skewed the perception, right? Because Garoppolo wasn't giving you backup quarterback to start the year level play. He's a starter in the NFL. He will be a starter next year when he comes back from injury, and that's the level of play he was giving you. And then he gets hurt, And then Purdy takes it a step further where he's playing as well as Garoppolo was, but even better. And he's not giving you what third string rookie should be playing. So then there's this standard where like this season should have, and actually it should have been over a long time ago, but the Niners were kind of lucky because they did have so much depth at quarterback. And unfortunately, those injuries piled up and the depth ultimately caught up to them. And when you're at Josh Johnson, it doesn't matter who's coaching you or what. Philadelphia is way too good to lose a playoff game at home to Josh Johnson or Jacob Eason, Larry, if you want to go there. I mean, Jacob Eason, of course, is a much better arm than Josh Johnson, but he is very slow, very unathletic, very deliberate in the pocket. I think he would have had a lot of issues against, obviously, that Philadelphia rush. He also isn't, the world's greatest processor or anything either, but he's got a howitzer for an arm, special arm. Still remember that throw his freshman year at Georgia. That was far hash across the field, absolute bomb. Whew.
I just don't understand why. I mean, if you have Jacob Eason and he's learning in your system, why go to Josh Johnson? I'm not really sure. And then it was just so weird because
maybe Jacob Eason isn't good, Larry.
What's that?
I mean, I don't think Jacob Eason's probably better than Josh Johnson, to be honest.
Well, he definitely throws the ball better.
He throws it better, but do you think Eason would be able to?
If you asked me to get if I had 25 NFL teams sitting right here right now, and I said you need to win a game and you can have Jacob Eason or Josh Johnson, I think they would all go with Jacob Eason.
I think they would plead the fifth, lose the game, and move on.
Well,
you're not winning with either of those guys, Larry.
Lose the game anyway, so whatever.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Ultimately, yeah.
We are playing at a very high level.
I agree.
And that's why they had a chance to win. And I don't even know that they would have had a chance to win with Lance or with Garoppolo. They didn't play at as high a level as Purdy did. So Purdy was clearly their best chance. He also was their last chance.
Right.
And they somehow, whether they got him hurt or he got hurt, whatever your way you want to say it, he wasn't available. And as soon as he wasn't available, the game was over.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And ultimately, that's really where the conversation to me of the game gets kind of put to bed. They just didn't have a functioning quarterback. If they did, maybe they win, maybe they lose. But yeah, that's really where the conversation was. I think the seriousness of Purdy's injury, if you want to move on to that, is now becoming a concern because I think the way that injury happened and the severity of that injury is kind of worst case scenario for the 49ers because it once again muddies up what they're going to do with their quarterback situation going into next year, right? We thought Purdy had played at a good enough level where he would go into next offseason as the starter. You still have Lance and you would have this financially very stable quarterback room with two guys whose talent you believe in, one who you believed in so much to trade up for in the draft, and then one who you believed in based on the 7 games he started this year, right? He was pretty historic for his first 7 starts in Purdy. And you had 2 guys who were young and cheap, and you could ultimately find out in the long term which one of them is your quarterback, right? You think both of them have the opportunity and the potential to, and we would have found out. Well, now Purdy has this serious UCL injury, right? We'll find out if he's getting reconstructive surgery or not. Lance is still rehabbing his ankle. He said he's going to be 100% for OTAs, and he's coming. What do you think kind of happens, right? Because now you throw out the Tom Brady question. I think this is actually the perfect time to go to Brady, especially when you suffer the kind of loss that the Niners just did in the NFC Championship game. You need something, I feel like, that's going to give your team juice to come back next year. I feel like you feel defeated. 2 straight years you go to the NFC Championship game. Last year, obviously, what happened? Of course, the Jaquiski Tartt dropped pick, but then the collapse, Jimmy Garoppolo falling apart late in that game, and the Niners corners ultimately being unable to hold up against Cooper Kupp and Odell Beckham. And then now you go this year and you go through all the quarterback injuries. You think you're a better team than last year. You think you're maybe even a better team than 2019. You're so stacked, you trade for Christian McCaffrey, and ultimately you don't get over the top because your quarterback gets hurt. I feel like this team does need a little bit of juice, and I think Brady would reinvigorate this team in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of people are lost on where Tom Brady is in his career too. If you're talking about from an evaluation standpoint, he's still a top-notch thrower, right? He can still rip it with absolute accuracy, precision. He's got a great arm. He's got great arm strength. He just can't deal with pressure that well. And his movement has always been limited and it remains limited, but he can't take hits anymore. And so you got to protect him and you got to put him in a system. And the Niners are going to give him all the things that the Bucs gave him in 2020 that they no longer gave him last year. And while he still played well, Brady, and this is the best way I can describe it, Larry. If I was taking 15 quarterbacks, to start my team and I had a blank slate team and I had to build around them and I had to maybe build around the quarterback and the quarterback has to do more with less, Brady might be closer to 15 than he is to 5, But if I have an already great team and I need a quarterback who can do more with more, Brady's probably closer to 5 than he is with 15 because he can still take advantage of everything you have. He can no longer compensate as much for your weaknesses. So I still think that if that's a possibility for cheap, that would be a good option. And then, of course, you have Lance himself, who the Niners believed in so much, right, that they traded up that much to go draft him. They, penciled him in as the starter with this plan for him. He gets hurt week 2. Now you're 3 years removed from him playing, but you also would like to see, what you got in him ultimately, because again, the thing I've always been consistent about with Lance is whether you like him, whether you don't like him, he's been as advertised. He's been the person that he was advertised to be, and he's also been the player he's been advertised to be. And your advertisation was all about his growth path. And well, let's see him grow and see that. So it's a muddied conversation. I know I'm taking a lot there, Larry, and I know I touched on a lot. So I'm going to give you the floor. But what do you think is going to ultimately happen? And what's your opinion, starting with the Purdy injury? What happens with Lance? Do they go the veteran backup route and Brady?
Well, okay. First, start with Purdy. They say it's a torn ulnar collateral ligament in his right throwing elbow. Obviously, first quarter injury. The MRI revealed a tear, but then Brock said today that he's still unsure of which direction his recovery is going to go. And they have more imaging scheduled or was scheduled for later on today. And we don't know what that imaging has revealed. Purdy talked about it today. He said there's different options in terms of letting it recover. You can have surgery, all these different types of surgeries, repair versus reconstruction. So we still haven't come to a conclusion about any of that, Purdy said. I'm working with our medical team now, and we're still trying to come to a conclusion on what I have to do. But there's literally nothing that I know yet for sure that's set in stone. So according to what I'm reading, Purdy and the Niners are hoping that he'll be able to have a surgical UCL repair augmented with an internal brace to help reinforce the ligament as the ligament
They don't want
heals.
the reconstruction. They want the repair.
They want to avoid Tommy John, which would be like probably a year and a half out where he'd play again. So the Tommy John is a full reconstruction with a tendon graft. They would like to do this operation that they're talking about where the ligaments reinforced, and the timeline for that recovery from that operation would have Purdy back in about 6 months. Now, if that is the timeline that he's going to recover on, he would be ready for the start of training camp. So, Purdy, I guess, says the elbow's swollen, but feels normal when it's stationary. But he still feels pain in it. And so I guess I don't know what the Niners' plan is, but I mean, you can't really plan on Brock Purdy being your starting quarterback if you're not going to know until July if he can go. And then you got Trey Lance, who's got multiple surgeries now. And it's not even a question of whether Trey Lance can go. It's whether or not, do they want, is Trey Lance ready to win? And that's the other question. Sherpagny says Larry doesn't want Lance on the field at all. Sherpagny is wrong. Of course. No, I don't. I love Lance. I'm the one who wanted Lance. So all you people saying that I'm anti-Lance are high. I like Lance a lot. I liked Lance as a prospect. I told you and others that I preferred Lance to Mac Jones, to Justin Fields, to virtually every other quarterback that was available at 3. I'm the one who liked Lance, but
Right.
because I went on with Grant, and Grant's got all of his minions, and he's pro Lance. I'm not pro Lance. I just know that where Lance is. I know football, and I know where
Yeah.
Lance is. I know where Lance's development is, and I know how the team's going to look if you put him out there. They're going to be very different than they are now. He's got big playability. He's going to improve, but there's going to be some ugly games. There's going to be some 52% completion games, and games where, kind of like the Bears game in the first half or the
Yeah.
Texans game in the first half, where you look up and you're like, we have less than 10 points and we don't look that sharp. So Lance is a quarterback drafted on traits, and he has those traits, and he still has those traits. But just because you have traits doesn't mean that you're ready to step in and win in the NFL. And I don't like the way Shanahan used him, to be completely honest. And Shanahan didn't use him that way for no reason. He used him that way because he felt he needed to use him that way. So
Yeah.
he's telling us an awful lot by his usage of Lance of what he thinks of Trey as a pocket passer in the present. So there's that factor. Do
Yeah. Yeah. So
do
do
you
you
want
want
to
to
go
go
with
there right
Lance?
now? Do you want to go there right now before we
Uh,
go to the Brady part? Like,
whatever.
for example, I actually thought the way he used them was fine. I'm going to go there. Yeah, I know it's a little bit controversial, but all those quarterbacks that we like to talk about, right, that had this development route, you had to put the game on their legs early in their career because they were still learning how to play from the pocket, right? You had
But
to
there's
put the
different
game on
ways of
Josh
doing
Allen's
that. There's
legs.
different ways
Right.
of doing that. You
There
don't
is,
have
Larry,
just
but
because somebody's going to use a quarterback's legs doesn't mean you're going to snap the ball to him and then just basically let him find a hole
I mean, he made the wrong
unblocked.
read, right? He made the wrong
Unblocked.
read.
They
It's
did
a
that.
zone
They
read
did that
play.
a bunch. They did that a ton. They snapped the ball to Lance in the shotgun, no blockers except for his offensive line, and
Right,
then
they
just
ran
said,
some quarterback draws, right, with him, a
just
couple of
run,
quarterback
just
powers.
find a hole, make it happen. I don't like that at
And
all. I don't like running my quarterback between the tackles. You get your legs broken between the tackles, and he almost did.
right, I mean, yes, those things are inarguable, right? You get more injured running in between the tackles. The one thing I would say is I those are also the runs he executed in college as well, right? So you're also trying to live in his comfortability. But I think more or less you and I are agreeing in a lot of ways. We agree with where Lance is in his development. We also agree with where his potential could be. I feel like there's a complete disconnect in this conversation because I feel like a lot of people who are pro starting Lance don't necessarily realize, how that really would look in a lot of ways. And I don't think they realize, in fact, and it's not even as a discredit to Trey Lance, because I just feel like that's part of his growth journey for him to ultimately reach where he ends up reaching. And if he ends up reaching, what his growth capacity is, he could be, a top five-ish quarterback in the NFL. It's just more a case of where he is right now, and where he is right now results in the offense having to be executed a certain way, right? Like when the Niners brought Jimmy Garoppolo back, there was that Jay Glazer story in the middle of the season about how Shanahan and Lynch brought in those 15 veterans and told them that every time Lance throws an incompletion, interception, anything, you got to prop him up and bring it. So they kind of knew how it was going to look early with Lance. They were hoping that there would be a level of growth that would occur during the season. And I think the fact that he hasn't been able to play for 3 years, it has to make you a little bit nervous. Just because that there's still development he needs to go through, but you also have to make
But
a
that's not
decision on
true.
his
See,
fifth year
that what
option.
you said there isn't true. He did play. He played. It was September 11th. It was at Soldier Field. He went
Come on, Larry.
13 of 28.
That
It
game
was
was in a
100. He threw for
monsoon.
164 yards.
It
He
was in a
completed
monsoon.
46% of his passes. He had threw no touchdowns. He threw one interception. His long completion was 44 yards. He took 2 sacks. I'm just saying, he played. He played. It wasn't like
The
he didn't
game,
play. He
Larry,
did
come
play.
on. The fourth quarter of that game was halfway underwater. I couldn't really get a fair grip on,
I'm
what we
not
can
saying
see.
but just there's people that are going to parse everything that we're saying. At least just say it the way it is. He played. He played.
Right, he
It was
played.
a
He
rainy
played.
day. He played, but he did not
Right.
play. He did play. There's a big
Right.
difference between
No,
not
you're
playing
right
and playing.
about that. You're absolutely right about that. And we did get to see a little bit in preseason. And I thought, I want to say, was it the preseason game against the Texans where he took a couple of sacks and stuff? I thought he was late getting rid of the ball. Thought he didn't manage the pocket too well. So he had his up and down moments in the little we've seen him play. But even that sample, Larry, whether, we agree he played, right? I'm not going to disagree with you. He played. But even that playing, it's such a small sample for us to say, like, pencil it in. This is exactly who he is. And we want to see that play out. And the unfortunate situation is the timing of letting that play out and the timing of where this team is. I don't know if that really works, right? You look at this defense, you're 1 year closer now to this defense getting a little bit older and everybody in this defense getting really old. And you have this core of an amazing players. We'll see what they want to do ultimately with the quarterback situation. But the third name we have to touch on, right? Because I'm sure we're going to talk more about Trey Lance this offseason. We're going to find out what happens with Brock Purdy's elbow and talk about him. They're big players in this quarterback game, in this entire conversation, obviously. We feel like one of those two guys will ultimately be starting week 1. But the third name is the boogeyman, Brady, who the Niners passed on a while ago. What are your thoughts on that? And then we'll get to a couple of questions.
Well, I mean, what the 49ers are a Super Bowl contending team. So if Brock Purdy is not 100% and Trey Lance is not 100%, and they don't know if they don't they have to bring in another quarterback? I mean, I would love to just go with the 2 rookie quarterbacks because that's the best move on the cap. That's the cheapest move. That's going to allow you to have the best surrounding cast. To have 2 rookie quarterbacks. If you want to say, I want to put the best team together, it should be Purdy as the 1, Lance as the 2, let them compete this summer. And there you go. And don't touch Tom Brady because Tom Brady, unless Tom Brady's going to give you a hometown discount, Tom Brady's going to cost you, I would say, close to $35 million a year. So how do you pay Bosa? I mean, there was no plan for this. You know what I'm saying? The plan was to move off Jimmy, pay Bosa, pay Debo.
The plan was to have the quarterback be cheap.
Right. And so now can you go back to Brady? I don't know that you can and still do all the things you want to do with your roster. And it doesn't make sense to go to Brady if you can't protect him. And if you can't have Brady and then, I mean, I'm looking at it this way. Tom Brady probably wants to be a Niner. Why? Because he's probably dreamed of being a Niners whole life. Also, he probably would like to live in the Bay Area, and he knows that if he plays in the Niner uniform, his popularity locally is going to go through the roof for the rest of the time, and he's going to be able to walk around as a 49er and be welcomed in the Niner family, basically for the rest of his life on the planet. So I think that's what motivates him. Well, what would make him even more popular among Niner fans if he came back if he played for the Niners the way Dion played for the Niners, where he basically said, I want to play for the Niners and I'll do it for $1 million. I mean, that's what Dion did. Dion made a ton of money with Dallas. With the Niners, he took just, whatever it was, a basic deal. If Tom Brady's willing to take a sweetheart hometown discount to help the Niners on the cap, I think that serves his purpose. I think that makes him, I think it's a popular move if he comes home. It's an enormously popular move if he comes home for less. So I think it makes sense if he's willing to come home for less. But if he's not willing to come home for less, you need to improve the offensive line. And what about the value? What about the bootleg game? I mean, it seems like the bootleg game seems like a staple of the Shanahan offense. Is Shanahan, who's running this offense if Brady comes in? Is it Brady running the offense and he's dictating to Shanahan? Or is Shanahan still the big dog and he's going to dictate to Brady? Can Shanahan, somehow design an offense that, keeps Tom in the pocket and doesn't lean on any kind of quarterback movement that he's not good at? And can they protect a stationary 46-year-old quarterback with, Colton McKivitz at right tackle and Spencer Burford at right guard? Tom Brady hasn't missed a game in a decade, probably more. Is he going to miss games because he's got offensive linemen that can't protect him?
He dropped back how many times this year?
66 in the last game.
Right. And that Bucs offensive line, are we even going to compare them to this 49ers offensive line? This year, with Wirfs getting hurt, Ali Marpet retiring, Kappa going to Cincinnati, Ryan Jensen getting hurt, and Donovan Smith holding every play and all those backups that they played.
I never felt like Tampa was a good fit for Brady. Why? Because Tampa has a downfield passing attack. So if you have a limited offensive line in Tampa, Tom's going to struggle.
But they
And he
didn't when he
did.
got there,
And he
right?
still got rid of the ball in time. He still got
They
rid of the
won
ball
the Super
quickly.
Bowl his first year, though, because they didn't, right? They had Marpet, they had Kappa, they had Jensen, they had Donovan Smith, who at the time was not a premier left tackle, but he was right below what a premier left tackle is. And then they drafted Wirfs, who's been kind of a Hall of Fame right tackle kind of player since he's been drafted. So they didn't originally, right? And I agree with you. The system is going to be important, right? Because I think the best point Chris Collinsworth makes every time he talks about the Niners offense is he talks about the meeting point for the quarterback and the running back when you're running wide zone. And he talks about how athletic the quarterback has to be in his drop and how explosive he has to be to meet the running back there, right, when you're running wide zone. And those are some athletic limitations involved with Brady. But I think those things can be adjusted. Shanahan has made a lot of tweaks to their drop back pass game in some ways for Garoppolo too, making a lot of one step quick game, a lot of New England style passing. Brady's still the king of the middle of the field. He's still the king of the quick game. You see, it's hard to imagine him not being successful with players like McCaffrey and Debo and Kittle and I.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. I've been saying go get Brady for a while.
But I'm
all for Brady coming here. Why not? It would be a great story. It would make the team more interesting. Maybe Gronk would join him. I mean, here's the question. This is the question. And this is the question all Niner fans know is out there. What is better for the franchise? Is it better for the franchise to have Tom Brady and put all your eggs into winning next year with Tom Brady? Or is it best to, as Sherpagny is suggesting here, that he says Trey should have a losing season before we say no to him? So let's just assume that Sherpagny here is the entire public and the entire fan base. Are you willing to give away next season as a losing season to develop Trey Lance, or would you prefer that the 49ers don't go and give away next season as a losing season and go for a Super Bowl next year with Tom Brady? I would argue that it's more of a year. They're at a point now where they're a year-to-year operation. They're going for the Super Bowl. They're all in. I think they'll go with Brady. I think they will.
My apologies for interrupting you there, but one thing I do want to add in that conversation, I agree with you. I think the operation is now year to year. To me, Shanahan, his body language after the game, it was a guy that's frustrated, a guy that feels like they should have won the Super Bowl one of these 3 years they've made it to the NFC Championship game, and each time something has gone wrong, and this was the worst thing that's gone wrong for them in a big game. They didn't even lose. They didn't even get a chance to compete. That's what ended up happening when Brock Purdy got hurt, right? Right. There was no chance. I do think the one thing we got to add, right, Larry, is that I don't know if we're guaranteed to say losing season with Trey Lance, right? If we walked into – a lot of us picked the 49ers to be very good last year, and it was the same circumstances Trey Lance would have been walking into last year as this year in terms of him being the starter. They very well could win a lot of games, too, with Trey Lance starting. I just think that it would look a little bit different from Brock Purdy and Jimmy Garoppolo, and I think that's okay. And I think a lot of Niners fans have this obsession. Trey needs to run this offense, and Brock needs to run this offense, and Garoppolo needs to run this offense. They ultimately need to run this offense that's going to enhance their skill sets, that's going to allow the 49ers to win as much as possible. And for Trey Lance, when you add the run element, you add the read element, it allows them to add certain RPOs, certain abilities to throw it into the bubble that makes passing the ball easier for him. Why would you not use the running skill set, right? To turn 11-on-11 football, to turn the opportunities to pass even easier, even if Lance is what I don't believe he is yet. He maybe could end up being, but a lot of people seem to think he is so good in the drop back game right now. He's good enough. He's accurate enough that you could just run it exactly the way you run it with Garoppolo and Purdy, who are both pretty accurate quarterbacks. Okay, you may know that. I don't know that. So let's say you know that. Even if you do know that, if you have a quarterback that can run, the way it challenges defense schematically, the stress it puts on them, right? Hurts is a great example of, yes, they have a great offensive line. He's a special runner. And their offense that stresses it puts on defenses, as good as he is passing, as good as Brown is on the outside, as good as Smith is on the outside, as good as their offensive line is, that offense is built around the fact that they have a quarterback read element that you have to account for on every play. And when the quarterback does run the football, he runs it extremely effectively. And so that's where I know we haven't properly answered Sherpagne's question, and let's get to it. But I do think, Larry, I'm a little over the conversation with Trey Lance of don't run him X amount of times, whatever. I feel like it gives him a better opportunity to succeed on Sundays when you put him in the run game and you add that. We didn't get to see the full
But for
offense
how
unlocked.
long, man? For
He
how
got
long?
hurt.
For how long? How
And
long?
that's going to be the big question, right? That's going to be the big question.
Jalen Hurts
That's on both him and
almost
Shanahan,
didn't
right?
play. Almost
It's
didn't
on
play in
both
the
him and
playoffs.
Shanahan, though, right? He's got to
Where
do
was
a better
Lamar?
job of getting down and he's got to do a better job of getting down and protecting himself as well. And then, of course, it's going to be on Shanahan as well. I do think the number of design runs they called is a little overrated too, because Lance is early in his career, as all quarterbacks do, has a tendency to also run himself on a lot of plays, and a lot of these runs and rushing attempts or scrambles that, you know, he doesn't like what he's seeing, and he's run outside of the pocket. And he's also right. The Isaiah Simmons hit he took his first start against Arizona, to me, is the worst example of this. Like, that was one, I know it was 4th and goal. He was going to the end zone, but he got walloped. You can't take too many of those if you want to have a sustained career as a starting quarterback in the NFL. But absolutely, I think there's nuance to that conversation, Larry, that we have to talk about the sustenance, and I'm sure we will. But let's get to Sharpagne's question. He says, what is the best thing for Purdy's future career? Put on your medical hat, Larry Krueger. Dr. Larry Krueger's in the house. Let me know. Should he get Tommy John, Larry, or what should they do? And then, of course, it's the 49ers element, right? Because you were talking about win now versus that. Do you think, what do you think's best for Brock Purdy in this case?
He should listen to his doctor and do whatever the doctor says is best for his long-term future. And don't shortcut this thing to get back in the field sooner. This is your career we're talking about. So Brock Purdy should do what so many players in football don't do, and that's he should think about himself and not think about the team. Don't worry about the team. The team's always going to be there. Worry about yourself. Get your elbow right. Don't take shortcuts. Don't do Band-Aid approaches. Get good medical advice. Get multiple opinions. And then follow that good medical advice. And if that means that they're advising a reconstruction, then get a reconstruction. If they're advising something lesser and you think that's the right path, then do that. Do what's right for you and your body and your career. Don't worry about the team. The NFL is a league that is, I don't want to. The Niners have the Golden Heart Fund, so they're different than a lot of teams. They do care about their players, but most teams in the NFL don't give a crap about their players. And as soon as they're done playing and outlive their usefulness, they don't care what happens to them. So just remember that there's a cold, ugly side of this business, and it's when you can't help us, we don't care about you. So just do what's best for yourself. And if that means that you can't be ready for training camp and you're not going to be ready till October, then so be it. If that means that it's going to take 18 months and you're going to miss next year, then so be it. Do what will put you in position to play the position again, play it at a level that is you're going to need to play it at, and take the time and do the rehab right. Because it's a major injury for a quarterback. It doesn't get too much more major than an elbow. So
Right.
Don't listen only to the team doctor. Get your own doctor and, see what he has to say. And, always question everybody to see what their agenda is. And I would definitely this is your, there's no way it's like anything else. This is your moneymaker. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself, prioritize yourself. Don't worry about the timeline. You've already shown the fans of the region, the team, the players that you've got the goods. So just, and they're going to be expecting you to play at a similar level to the level that you played previously. So get right and get ready to play at that level and do whatever you have to do to get to that level.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, Larry. Yeah, 100% agree. Just do whatever's best for your career I think that's the best answer to your question, Sherpagni, and that's an answer only Brock Purdy has, and he has to make that decision for himself. Um, Thank you for the donation, by the way. Underscore Carl Zion says 100% agree with you, Vish. This team needs something to get them motivated for next season. More uncertainty with quarterback is really deflating. Bring in Brady. I do think there is a little bit of that to it, Larry. Right? If the future of these quarterbacks and everything around the situation is once again murky and cloudy, I feel like it can be deflating for a team that's gone through a lot of heartbreak between losing the Super Bowl, what happened last year, and now what happened this year. I think bringing in Brady would feel like they're doing something a little different, something a little new, and it might be a little reinvigorating in its own ways. But of course, we have to see what the attitude of this team is when they come back and all of that. There's no way of telling any of these things now, this close to when the season's done. It's truly just speculative based on how we think their emotions could be, based on, of course, having to deal with what they went through.
And I mean, I'll say this. I mean, selfishly, as somebody who's covered the 49ers, could you imagine a quarterback room of Purdy and Lance and Brady? But
Oh,
I think the one thing, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, yeah, it's a rough business. But when they drafted Trey, um, you're talking about a young man, and they had a chance to visit with the parents. They need to do right by Trey. They need to do right by Trey. So, um, I don't know what condition Trey's going to be in. I don't know what position Purdy's going to be in, but they got to do right by these young guys. You know what I'm saying? It's like both these young guys have to have an NFL career. And I don't want to see either of them kind of sacrificed for depth. You know what I mean? If you want to go with Tom Brady, that's totally up to you. But if those guys say, "Hey, you know what? Get me elsewhere," I think I would get them elsewhere. If Purdy says I want to be elsewhere, I would move him. If Lance says he wanted to be elsewhere, I would consider moving him. I don't, especially Lance, from the standpoint of he needs to play. He needs to play. And no more sitting and watching is going to be good. I don't care if it's Tom Brady and Kyle's offense and Purdy and this awesome room. He needs to play. And so I don't know what's going to happen, because I don't think the 49ers want to trade Purdy. And I don't think the 49ers necessarily should be in a rush to want to trade Lance, because his value is not what it was. I believe there's like a $20 million cap hit if they tried to trade Lance. But then you've got guys like Trent Williams and veteran players in the room who, man, you owe it to them to go for it next year. You're not going to take a redshirt year. So in some ways, I think Tom Brady's like the perfect guy to be sitting there as a free agent. He wants to play for you. He'd probably be willing to take less to play for you. Make it happen. Make it happen and make it all work. I mean, the one thing is, if Purdy didn't get hurt this weekend, and let's just say they lost, but he played pretty well.
It would be the exact situation I referenced earlier in the show, right? They would just go into this offseason with both those young guys and feel like, hey,
And it would be
Purdy's the start.
rejection.
Right.
It would be rejection to not go with Purdy if he had.
Exactly.
But now it's not rejection. And with Lance, because he's had multiple surgeries and he may or may not be ready, it's not necessarily rejection to go with Tom Brady. So
that's the second
in some
part
ways,
of
I
this
think that could help
conversation
the dynamic.
Right. That's the second part of this conversation I want to focus on too, because it's not just that these two guys are young, and in a lot of ways, both are relatively unknown, right? We have a larger sample on Purdy than we do on Lance, but we have to see 2-3 years before we can anoint either of these guys as franchise quarterbacks for the 49ers. Both have shown capabilities of possibly being that one day in different ways, right? Purdy with how he's played the last 7 games, and then Lance with his potential, where he was drafted and why he was drafted, right? Agreed on both accounts. But now that they're coming back from injury, Larry, 2 things I want to mention. One, I think that we take to granted, the medical recovery of NFL players and their injuries all the time. I think we take it for granted. I think we take for granted how superhuman it is when they get they get parts of their body reconstructed, they get these surgeries. Not only are they able to come back so quickly, they're able to come back and play at the same level or an even higher level. They have to cross a lot of mental barriers to do that, and it's a lot of physical barriers, right? When we get injuries and stuff, we're not having to force to be ready to put our body on the line and be athletically where we were before because our livelihood is relying on it. And I think we take it for granted too much. There's no guarantee either of these two guys walk into minicamp as the same exact player that they were before they got hurt. Knock on wood that they do. But again, Larry, there's complications with these type of things. It's not exactly fair to just expect that and expect that there's not going to be some issues, whether it's mental or physical, lingering from the injuries. And so that's another part of this that we have to talk about, right? Purdy could be physically ready, medically cleared to play at training camp, but you might not have the Brock Purdy you had this year. It might take time for him to rediscover that guy and get comfortable with having to go through whatever repair he had to. And the same thing applies for Trey Lance here. And that's where I feel like the Brady part of it at least gives you a little, it just settles everything. And like you said, it's an easier sell because both guys aren't healthy right now either, right? They're both going to be recovering from some stuff. But we're going to continue having this conversation, Larry. Last question, and this is directed towards you from very nicely from Kalba Kimiga. Kim. All right, I'm not going to keep butchering that. Yeah, sorry about that. Kimiga? That's horrible pronunciation on my part.
Kalba's a regular on the Krueger show. Right. So Kalba, good to see you.
All right, Kalba. Larry, this is to you. He said, one thing I've learned from a lot of Lance bros. So we got this new iteration of fandom within 49ers sexual. I said 49ers sexual because I was thinking of the Trey sexuals and the Jimmy sexuals that they call them, right? And then, so we have a new section of fans, the Lance bros, is unless that you say Lance will win 20 of the next 10 MVPs. So he's going to double. That means they're going to give him 2 MVPs every year, Larry. You're a Lance hater. We all want Lance to succeed. Calm down, folks.
Seriously, calm down. And also know who you're talking to. You know what I mean? That's like,
yeah.
No, if you're going to sit here and tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, then bring it. But know who you're talking to. You know, if you've been following me for 5 seconds, okay, I get it. But if you've been following me this year or since Lance came into the league, you know, I was always pro Trey Lance.
I disagree. I don't believe it. I remember you're the biggest Trey Lance hater ever. No, I'm joking.
I'm pro Trey Lance. I really believe in him. Now, the only thing that I've changed my mind on is the time frame. But you know who I see when I see in Trey Lance? I see Alex Smith.
I know you've said this so many times. Smith.
He's smart. He's athletic. Football's important to him. He wants it. When you're smart and you're athletic and football's important, so you're going to spend the time to get better and you want it and you're like a good, good person from a good family and you really, try hard and, you have a good work ethic about you. That's it, man. That's all the factors. Time to turn off the film and go on to the next guy. So I like Trey Lance, and I know Trey Lance is going to succeed, but I don't have a timeline that I can guarantee you. John Lynch said to me, Larry, tell me what you think about Lance. I would tell him exactly what I thought, but I really believe Trey is going to work to get better, but he has a lot of development to do. And he's not going to hit the ground running with instant success, no matter how much talent you put around him. It takes nuance to play the position, and it takes reps and learning. And all I'm saying is somebody who knows Trey Lance a little bit and knows how long what I'm projecting as his improvement curve. I don't think any of you have the patience for it. I don't think any so either, 49er media or fans or coaches or players have the true patience to go through the bumps in the road that it's going to take. I saw one of the guys, Chapagne, said, let him have a losing season first. A losing season first? People here lose their mind if you lose a game or two. Right. You really think 49er fans are going to suffer through 6-10, 6-11 with Trey Lance, and then all of a sudden be like, you know what? Let's run it back with Trey. I see improvement.
Do you think this team will
get him the hell out of here?
Do you think this
That's
team
how
will too?
spoiled the fan base is. So my only problem with the Niners drafting Trey Lance is that they're not willing, and the fans aren't willing. The franchise isn't willing. Nobody is willing to actually give Trey the ramp up period that he logically needs. So I don't think it's going to work. So, I mean, as much as I like Trey, and I'd be scared as hell to trade Trey because Trey's got arm strength, foot speed, strength, into intellect, desire. I mean, he's got a lot of the traits that you're like, man, I want that in my quarterback. I'd be scared as hell to trade him. But guess what? I think if you go after Tom Brady, or if you go next year and say Brock Purdy's our starter and he heals after 6 months, and you say he's, Brock, based on how he played last year, is the guy. Or if Brock and Trey play this summer both in camp and Brock is more efficient and wins that job, I just don't think that Trey is going to want to sit here, nor should, as the number 2. I think he's going to want to go somewhere, and there's several spots that he could go and be the number 1. So that's all I'm saying. We all talk about these things like Trey has a lifetime contract. I think it's very likely that if the Niners go with
They have to make a
Purdy or
decision on it this
with
year.
Brady, that his agent may just whisper to John Lynch, send me to Tennessee, move me out of here. So then what? Then what do? You have Lance against his will as a backup when he desperately needs to play, and you're not going to let him play because you don't think he's as good as the other guys or whatever. It's very complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. You know what I'm saying? It's not as simple as Trey's cheap, Brock's cheap. Put them together, figure it out. It's not that simple. Somebody's going to demand a trade.
Yeah, I don't think they should trade Trey Lance right now, no matter what. I don't believe that. If he demands a trade, then I still don't know what leg he has to really stand on.
He doesn't have any leverage, really.
Right. He has no leverage. You just keep him and you see where he is, because right now,
but do you want a quarterback against his will?
He's going to, he's got to be, I don't know there, but it depends. Well, let's see that situation play out. First thing I want to say is the last 5 minutes, all I heard was Larry Krueger hates Trey Lance. I didn't hear anything else. That's all I heard. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, Larry really likes Trey Lance and all of that. And I agree with you. I don't think this team nor this fan base is ready for that development route. And I think part of it is too, and I brought this up before the draft, and a lot of people shut me down, but I talked about the timeline of the quarterback with the team, right? You want to talk about Josh Allen and the Bills. They made the playoffs the previous year before with Tyrod Taylor. And that was kind of the remnants of Rex Ryan's team with Mario Williams and those guys still there. And they made the playoffs. They lost to Jacksonville in a very defensive game. But they accumulated 2 first-round picks the year before, right? Showing that Bean, who was ultimately hired later, but McDermott had a long-term plan. They were the team in the Patrick Mahomes trade, right? They traded to the back of the first-round pick, Trey White, and they had the second first-round pick, which they then used to pick Josh Allen and Tremaine Edmonds the next year in the first round. Well, they had a young team that kind of grew with Josh Allen, and they were willing to basically be a bad team, right? The first week of that season, which was the 2019 season, I think they got stomped on by Baltimore, right? Lamar Jackson, was that week 1? No, Lamar Jackson, I think week 1 was in Miami. They stomped on Miami. But I think week 2 or week 3, either way, they had a horrible loss. Buffalo, week 1 early. Nathan Peterman started. Josh Allen was ultimately forced to play. They were bad the next year. They made the playoffs, but, Josh Allen had his issues still. He was finally learning how to play a little bit within structure, but he was still, getting comfortable, and they were running him a lot. It's kind of the same thing with Hurts, to be honest. Philadelphia moved off of so many veteran players, and they kind of rebuilt this squad on the fly. Of course, they kept Brandon Graham, Jason Kelsey, and Fletcher Cox, but, they got rid of a Brandon Brooks, who was an all-pro card on their Super Bowl team. And Lane Johnson, of course, is still there. They got rid of a Jason Peters, who was there for so long and such a veteran player. They got rid of Carson Wentz, who was considered to be their quarterback of the future, right? They got rid of so many players in the secondary, Malcolm Jenkins, different players like that, Rodney McLeod, who started there for a long time. They got rid of so many different players, and they kind of rebuilt that team on the fly to grow with Jalen Hurts. This team's already built. This team's already ready to go. They're ready to win. They're ready to win the Super Bowl, and that's where I'm not so sure the timeline really matches up for either of these players. I've said this before, but then at the same time, I also feel like this team's so talented. Maybe if they're willing to put up with it a little bit, they can still win with Lance playing this way and he can kind of develop on the fly. That's what I thought would happen last year. He unfortunately got hurt. Maybe that's what happens this year, Larry. But there's a lot of conversation still yet to have about the 49ers quarterbacks. And the nice thing about the 49ers is every offseason they make their quarterback situation interesting. And you and I can sit here every week for the next 5-6
awesome.
months and just let it go about the 49ers quarterbacks. But Carlos
it's going to be
Urbina
awesome.
says,
By the way, Niners Nation is reporting, Vish, that Trey expects to be medically cleared in 3 to 4 weeks. He expects to be 100% by OTAs. So he basically said that he should be fully cleared in 4 weeks to start for the start of OTAs in April. He hasn't talked to Shanahan about the 2023 quarterback plan. His right foot is still in an orthopedic boot, but he's ramping up and feels good about it. And I'll say this, I bet you, knowing the diligence of Trey, that he benefited by watching Brock this year, do his thing as a rookie and saw the importance of several of the nuances that Brock carried out. And so I expect Trey, next time Trey hits the field, to obviously know this offense better, but also to have added some of those nuances to his own game. So I'm really eager to see what Trey and Brock look like this summer. And if they want to go that route and build up the rest of the football team, that's fine as well. Maybe you start the season with Lance and Purdy's the backup if Brock's not ready to roll, or maybe Brock's ready by camp and they can actually have a competition and we can see this summer. But I do think it kind of sets up perfectly for Tom Brady, but it also is going to make Brock and Trey wait another year for sure, because Tom Brady's not going to play like a few games and then a few games. He plays all the games for all the games.
The thing with Brady is he's only a solution if you win the Super Bowl. Because if you don't win the Super Bowl, then you don't win the Super Bowl, and it's 3 years in a row. You're back into the same position you've been, and it's kind of this black hole abyss of quarterback, not mediocrity, but just looking and hoping that you have a quarterback. But Carlos Urbina says, let Lance have a losing season. It's okay. We have a first-round pick next year. Worst thing that happens is we end up with the top pick and draft a QB. Larry, what do you think?
Well, I'll say this. I would probably go look for, quarterbacks in this draft as well. I think there's some interesting quarterbacks in this draft. I really do.
Okay.
And I would be very interested to take a look at several of them. At the top of the draft are the guys you're not going to get, right? Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levis out of Kentucky. Those guys will be off the board. But there are other guys. Anthony Richardson is one of the greatest athletes I've ever seen in my life playing quarterback. And he's 6'3", 240 and fast. I mean, he's really fast. Now he's raw, but I mean, he's so exciting. I'd be very interested in him. He might be a second-round pick. They don't have a second-round pick, but Anthony Richardson. Tanner McKee from Stanford, 6'6", 225, junior. But he's in the draft. He's very mature. He's very accurate. He's not very mobile, but he's very accurate. I'd be interested in taking a look at him. Jake Haener, 6 feet, 195 pounds, Fresno State, redshirt senior, very veteran player. Interested in taking a look at him. Max Duggan from TCU, interested in taking a look at him. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, interested in him. Adrian Martinez, interested in him. Malik Cunningham from Louisville, saw him this weekend. Very interested in him. So even Lindsey Scott from Incarnate Word, who's a transfer, but he's interesting. So there's a bunch of guys out there. The Fordham kid, Tim DeMorat's interesting. This is going to be a really interesting quarterback
BYU
draft.
Guy, Jaren Hall,
I think his name is, right?
Yeah, he can throw. Jaren Hall.
Yeah, Jaren Hall. He's going to be a higher pick. I mean, they're talking about probably day 2 for Jaren Hall.
Well, I mean,
there's
a lot
of interesting players there.
Richardson's probably going in the first round. In fact, I haven't really gotten into the bulk of the draft, and unfortunately now
Richardson's
that the
scary
over,
good.
I will. But I've seen a few people talk about Richardson. I've watched a couple of his games. He's got a few Trey Lance qualities coming out of college. And to me, that was the first kind of name that struck me when I was just very briefly watching him, that he could be. I mean, that was my first impression, that he could be a similar prospect there. So it's intriguing that you build his name up. I'll actually find out if he actually is. This could be a completely wrong first impression. But let me do what Kid Trickster says. Vish, you need to stop talking. Let Larry talk. My bad, Larry. I gotta let the man talk.
Hey,
but
it's Vish's show, man. This is the Vish Kumaran Show.
Hey, it can't be the Vish Kumaran Show unless we have Larry Krueger here. Come on. But Green Glassful says, if Purdy and Lance go to other teams, I will be fan of all three football teams at this point. Strange world, the football world, go Niners. Look at this guy. He truly is Green Glassful.
I don't think they're trading Purdy, because I think Purdy really electrified them. I think he made Shanahan feel really good about calling a game with a young quarterback. I don't think they're trading Lance, because I think Lance it would be a penalty if you traded Lance at this point. But the one wild card factor is we don't know what their representatives would say if you went after a Tom Brady. I mean, it's the NFL. These guys want to play.
Right.
You know?
Right. And if there's a year for them to go to Tom Brady, even the 2019 look, I thought they should have gotten Brady. The lucky thing is, at the time, I wasn't doing anything like this, so I didn't actually have to put my name on it. But I understand why they didn't get him, because they were coming off of a Super Bowl loss at the end of the day, and that was their kind of first successful season since the Harbaugh days. And it's tough to move off of Garoppolo then. If there's a time that you feel like you can get Brady, now he's also 47, so that there's completely different, or 46, whatever. So the conversation is completely different. But if there's a time to get him, given the injuries that just occurred, this is again, when you talked about the sell earlier in the show, this is the year they can sell it, Larry. This is it. Vicky Pellich says, oh, Larry, this is a great solution. Draft Caleb Williams in the 2024 draft. Yeah. Trade for Mahomes while you're at it.
He's a nice player, no question. But that's a long ways off.
Yeah, what do you think? I mean,
first of all, they're not going to have that pick.
Right.
If they do have that pick, you guys are all going to be. Every Niner fan here is going to be in depression.
Right. That means everyone is going to be a clean house. House. Yeah. No, it's funny. It's funny, when I read this, I was thinking, yeah, well, they could also trade for Mahomes. They could also trade for Josh Allen. It's unlikely that they get themselves into a position, but yeah, ideally they would like to draft a guy that looks like he's going to be one of those truly special prospects. But let's see if he actually ends up being that, because there's been a lot of guys in my lifetime that have been promised to be that, but really very few that have actually ended up being that, like Andrew Luck and Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence.
Very difficult position to evaluate.
Agreed. So, Larry,
yes.
49ers now have an opening at defensive coordinator. D'Amico Ryans, as we all thought he would, as was widely reported, the Texans had penciled him on him. He wanted to go back to Houston, where his career started. His wife is from Houston. He's going back home on a nice, large 6-year deal, in some ways with some eerie similarities with the two coaches fired in back-to-back years, to Kyle Shanahan taking over with the 49ers. But he leaves a vacancy for that defensive coordinator role that either Steve Wilks or Vic Fangio or Chris Harris. Those are the three names they're interviewing right now. What do you think of this? Do you have a preference on which name ends up being the defensive coordinator ultimately? And is there any thoughts on the number of 49ers staffers that D'Amico is going to take? Obviously, he's interviewing Bobby Slowick. There were some reports that he's going to try and bring Chris Kasarik with him as his defensive coordinator. There was also conflicting reports that Shanahan was going to try and keep the entire staff outside of D'Amico as is. So what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, it's interesting. Chris Harris has coached in the NFL 9 years, 3 years as the Washington defensive backfield coach. I don't know a lot about him, but that's an interesting name. He's 40. He's never been a coordinator. So you're talking about taking a chance on a first-time coordinator. He's been a defensive backfield coach since 2013. Bears hired him as a defensive quality control coach before the 2013 season, and then he went 2 years there. Then he jumped to the Chargers in 2016. He was the assistant DB coach for 4 seasons there. And then in 2020, he got promoted to the defensive back coach for Washington, and that's where he's been the last 3 seasons. It's interesting. There was talk that he was going to join the Titans as their passing game coordinator on offense, which has kind of been a new trend in the NFL to hire people on the other side of the ball to try to, almost like self-scout type thing.
Right.
I think Fangio is the name because obviously he's a proven guy. The question is, if you bring in Vic Fangio, do you switch your front? And is Kocurek going to jump with D'Amico? Fangio's been a 3-4 guy, for most of his career. Now, I know Grant kind of poo-pooed that, like, most of these teams can switch back and forth. And he's right in that there's a lot of hybrids out there right now, hybrid 3-4, 4-3s. Some teams are going with a 4-3, but they have a 5-man surface, and it's kind of like a 5-2-4.
There you go.
Type.
Who plays that front right there? Philadelphia with John Gannon, right? They play
Seattle.
that 5-2. They play right. Seattle plays that 5-man front as well, and that's where I think Seattle, a team that actually did do this transition, and then you have Philadelphia, right? A team that does play with a lot of 4-man fronts and 5-man fronts, and they play the Vic Fangio style defense. I think those are 2 great examples of how it could work in San Francisco.
So, I mean, I don't know that much about Chris Harris. He's from Little Rock, Arkansas, and don't know a lot about him. But, interesting. He played at University of Louisiana at Monroe, and when the Bears drafted him in the 6th round in 2005. So, right. That's a new name. Fangio's the name that we know the best. I think Fangio – the way Kyle Shanahan looks at his defense, sometimes I think he likes to basically hand the defense over to the defensive coordinator and not mess with it that much. I don't think he wants to have his hands on everything. I think he wants to have a defensive coordinator that is fully capable of handling that whole side of the ball. So I think Fangio makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I 100% agree, right? That's the name, right? That's the big dog in the yard. That's arguably him and Belichick, the 2 most prestigious and quote-unquote brilliant defensive minds in the NFL, right? It's scheme right now. Everybody is copying it, that penny front, the tight front, all those different things they do. So here's my thing, though, on the 49ers defense overall. I think they've created a culture of defense here, Larry. You talked about the first-time coordinator thing with Chris Harris, Saleh, and D'Amico, where Shanahan seems to have great confidence in being able to find the right guys to lead this defense and communicate with this defense. And he seems to do a really, really good job of coaching his coaches and having his coaches do a really good job developing players and communicating their messages and having that be consistent with how they're going to do things philosophically and schematically. The most important thing to me in this, Larry, is that I think the 49ers have already created some level of structure with their defense, right? Saleh brought in a structure, and D'Amico followed it in a lot of ways. D'Amico put in his own wrinkle on the structure, right? He added so many more of these creepers and sim pressures, so many more of these zone dogs, a lot of things that Saleh maybe didn't do as much. And Saleh also put his own wrinkle on this defense, right, when they played a lot of man match and stuff like that. And they did obviously similar things, but they both had their own particular wrinkles on this defense when they coached it. I think similarly, it's a little Baltimore Ravens-ish to me now, Larry, where you have this defense with a philosophy and a culture built around 2 Hall of Fame caliber talents to me in Bosa and Warner, where I think the coordinator is a little interchangeable. They're going to come in and they're going to put their wrinkles on it, but the culture and the philosophy for this defense has already been set in. Schematically, I think Vic Fangio would also adjust a little bit to some of the things the 49ers do too. I don't think it would just be he comes in and completely implements his defense the way he normally does. Given the structure and given a lot of the success the 49ers have already had, I just look at it like that. And I think, Larry, that he would come in and he would also adjust to a few of the things the Niners have done in the past as well. And so I do think it would be a seamless fit. But honestly, Larry, I used to have strong opinions about this kinds of stuff but I'm not in the interviews. I don't really know ultimately. And I feel like coaches can be, scheme adjustable depending on how you want them to deliver a message and how you teach them to deliver a message. And I think Shanahan does an excellent job of that. So I'm confident they'll find the right coach. If they get Fangio, obviously it would be getting the big fish. It would be getting the mad scientist, the true genius. And you would feel like that's a big move in this offseason for the 49ers. He moves the needle a lot. But even if they don't, I wouldn't be shocked if they once again have a top 5 defense with Steve Wilks, with Chris Harris, with Vic Fangio. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Harris is the hot young name, right? He's a guy who, as I said, took a coaching gig
Right.
with Tennessee, but then he would, it'd be odd to see him leave there without coaching it down. But this is to be the Niners defensive coordinator. That's a bigger job than the Titans defensive passing game coordinator. So he's the hot name, who's the young guy rising up through the ranks. Then you've got Wilks, who's an established guy in his coaching prime. He's been a DC with the Carolina in 2017, with the Browns in 2019. He's been a head coach with the Carolina Panthers. So he's fully capable. And then there's the master in Fangio, who the ownership knows and Shanahan has tried to hire in other circumstances. So I would guess, and then the fact that Fangio was supposedly going to Miami, but then suddenly said, "Hey, I'm not committed anywhere." Maybe the Niners have gone to Fangio in the 11th hour, and he wants to stay here. Obviously he's been here a long time. He probably, that's the other thing you got to remember about coaches. They love to coach, they love to apply their craft, but a lot of times their life has something to do with where they are in the league. Sometimes, hey, there was a divorce and my wife's here and we've got kids and I want to be here as opposed to there. Some of these veteran coaches, their life impacts things. And I kind of wonder with Vic Fangio, who spent a lot of time with the Niners and then spent a lot of time with Stanford, if he has something that ties him to the Bay Area. And so he may prioritize being in Northern California over, a job with Miami, even if Miami paid a little bit more. So,
Right.
and then also, Jed, I know Jed, that'd be a very popular move. I'm not saying that Shanahan needs to make popular moves with Jed, but I think I think it's pretty well known that Vic Fangio is definitely a fan or a friend of the family, the York family. And I think that would be a very popular move with ownership.
Let me ask you this while we're on the conversation of Vic Fangio. Niner Boss Talk says he wants Steve Wilks. He does to replace D'Amico Ryans. But you bring up that they have this former relationship. Was there not a little bit of frustration on Vic Fangio's part when Jim Tomsula ultimately got that job in 2015? He did leave, right? Um
I don't think there's any doubt.
Yeah, so I don't know that for sure, but I do remember at the time it was reported that way. And obviously you'll know this better than anybody, Larry. You covered this exact situation up close and personal as you always do, but you covered this situation, right? There was some frustration. Did that lead to some bad blood in your opinion, or do you think the relationship between Fangio and Shanahan is so strong they share enough mutual respect that Fangio will forget the previous quote unquote grievance that the Niners organization, I guess, committed by passing him over and taking a relative on loan in Jim Tomsula and hiring him as their head coach? Yeah.
Well, there's no doubt that he was hurt at the time. I mean, there's just no doubt. I mean, he was the guy with the better resume. The Niners hired the D line coach instead as to be the head coach. I'm sure that didn't rub him right. You coach to be a head coach. So, the fact that Vic, was passed over there, but, Vic's also been at the facility. And first of all, that wasn't a Shanahan call. That was pre-Shanahan.
Right.
So it was more to do with the Niner ownership. But Vic Fangio has had multiple appearances at the Niner facility. He's one of their favorites, I think. So I would say there's if judging it from afar without sources, I would say there's no bad blood.
Yeah. I would say that's fair too. And I think that a lot of that relationship was amended by the respect I think he shares with Shanahan. And I think if he comes back, it would be solely to work with Shanahan rather than maybe as much as just to be coaching for the Niners, if that makes sense. But Niners Boss Talk also is kind enough. By the way, thank you guys for the donations. Make sure you guys are liking and subscribing. Make sure you're subscribed to Mr. Are we at 12K already?
No, we're almost approaching 13K.
Oh, okay. To Mr. 13K who
Mr.
interviewed
13K.
Steve Young, last week, by the way. So make sure you're subscribed to him as well. But Niner Boss Talk says, and guys, I'm still trying to figure out why Kyle thought it was okay to block Reddick with the tight end, right? This is going to be a never-ending conversation. I've answered this ad nauseum, Niner Boss Talk. So I'm going to give the floor to my man, Larry Krueger, and have him answer it and probably tell us why he hates Trey Lance some more. How about that, Larry?
Stop.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, but don't even kid, because then I'm going to get like all this hate mail and all kinds of stuff. As far as this play, this is 2020 hindsight. All right. And anybody who's blaming Kyle Shanahan for this is just doing 2020 hindsight. Do you know tell me, if you're going to tell me that you're going to question that, then you need to tell me how many times Kyle Shanahan has blocked the backside defensive end with a tight end
or a receiver.
And this is the thing. This is this tight end is now Croft a stud monster, awesome, the best blocking tight end in pro football? No. But he's more of a blocker than a receiver.
Right.
I mean, if you know your football, Tyler Croft is thought of as a blocker, as a try-hard blocker, as a guy who's, that's where his strength lies coming out of Rutgers. He wasn't thought to be this awesome receiver. He's 6'5", roughly 250, and he was thought to be blocking was his strength. So to have Tyler, and he didn't blow the block. If he had blown the block, he would have jumped outside and Reddick would have jumped inside. That's not what happened. The tight end on the backside is coached to block the backside defensive end and
outside
then release him to the outside. And that's what he did. Now, could he have, in an ideal world, could he have held his block a second longer? Sure. But also in an ideal world, the quarterback steps up into the pocket. In an ideal world, he gets rid of it before 3.7 seconds. So Brock held it a little long. Brock was maybe a step late in stepping up in the pocket. And Croft didn't hold the block for, maybe held the block for a half tick less than I was hoping. But he looked like he had lost his footwork. But Tyler Croft is known as a blocker. If you want to question anything, the question isn't with Shanahan. The question is, why doesn't John Lynch, on a team that loves two tight end sets, have a more representative second tight end than Ross Dwelley, undrafted free agent, Charlie Warner, just kind of a tenacious blocker type, but doesn't move people in the run game and is not much of a receiver, and Tyler Croft, who was a street free agent that anybody could have had. Bottom line is, you're going to have spots on your roster where you're going to have to kind of fill in. And in reality, if you're asking me as a pro personnel director, what would I say about the Niners tight ends? I would say Kittle's a 1, true number 1, top half of the league.
Mm-hmm.
And Dwelley's a 3, and Werner's a 3, and Croft is a 3. And when I say that, I mean, they don't have a second tight end. So if you really want to throw stones here, throw one at Lynch and say that he needs to upgrade his personnel behind Kittle at tight end. That's fair. To sit there and just blame Shanahan for doing something that he's done 35 times this year, but this was the one time it burned him, is just, it's a little too much 2020 hindsight. It's a little bit too much evaluating everything based on the result. And nobody called. We did an entire live stream last week. We talked Niners. I've been talking Niners for weeks. I've yet to have anybody bring up to me that the Niners second tight end is really more like a third tight end. That would have been a super astute observation by a fan. Didn't hear that. And I definitely didn't hear, man, if they go play action and they're trying to block a top tier, backside end, I really hope they don't lean on Krug, because I really don't have confidence that no, I didn't hear that. So it's all 2020 hindsight, and people are just saying, "Oh, that was the play Brock got crushed on." So let's blame Shanahan because that's the way it's done, and it's easy. It's easy to do. And J.J. Watt getting on there going, "Oh, you're gonna block this guy."
His brother has half his sacks rushing against tight ends and stuff because they play 5-man fronts and they get stuck in play actions where they
you can't. I mean, if you really didn't want to sell the play action, if you could have just take Colton McKivitz and put him out there and go big people, and just, if you really want to just make sure that block gets made, you could have put another offensive lineman out there. You could have, but then nobody believes the play action pass. So it's all
a
about
dumb conversation, Larry. It's a dumb conversation, in my opinion, right? If the 49ers are running in that position, right, and they're running and they go, what was it? I think they were I want to say they were 12 personnel on that play. Let's say they were 12 personnel, right? One back, two tight ends, and they're running on that play. Reddick is really a stand-up linebacker in their front on rundowns, right? He ends up being the wide edge player in terms of their rundowns because they play this 5-2 kind of front. They play that penny front, 5-2, 5-1. They do a lot of that. And so Reddick ends up being this wide edge player, which ends up being blocked. Really, he stands on top of the tight end to the strength of the formation a lot, which ends up creating that matchup in the run game a lot. Same thing happened in the pass game. Again, I thought Shanahan is right in the sense that he didn't get rid of the ball. I thought he was a hair late getting rid of the ball. He probably could have stepped up in the pocket too. Again, it's a bang play. I think the biggest part of all of this that we're discussing, these protection issues and all of that, is that Philly's rush is really that good. And Hassan Reddick, who's a great player, made a really, really great play on a protection that wasn't 100% sound, but it's a protection that you do, right? The 49ers did this same thing. The big play to Juwan Jennings against Seattle, right? They had the two verticals leaking out the backside, flooding the 3-deep zone. And Purdy actually threw a bad ball, threw it inside to Juwan Jennings, but he made a hell of a catch with Diggs swooping over the top. Well, they blocked the backside of that play with Deebo Samuel coming across, and he has Uchenna Nwosu, who's Seattle's best pass rusher, quote-unquote one-on-one. But between the play action, between the misdirection, Deebo kind of does enough. Juszczyk's able to come over and help, and Purdy gets the ball out on time, and that kind of works. You're not only blocking the player with Kroft, you're blocking him with the misdirection there. It's an unfortunate thing to happen, but it's a thing that happens every Sunday. And the thing with the Eagles front is that their front is so good that they can create situations where even if you're in play action and you have whatever numbers you have things blocked up correctly, the conversation changes because the Eagles personnel is so good, right, Larry? Where when you're playing the Eagles now, blocking their entire front becomes a problem. I don't really like this conversation. I still haven't seen one football point to really make this make sense other than, oh, Brock Purdy got hurt, so Kroft should never be blocking Hassan Reddick. Well, if Brock Purdy lets go of that ball on time, and he did have Ayuk, right, breaking to the corner. If he lets that go, I don't know why he didn't. He was looking right at it. If he just lets it go and rips it, that everybody is going to be pointing to that and be like, oh, look at Shanahan. Look at how smart they were with the protection, where they brought in the extra tight end, made it look like run. Now Reddick stuck playing the run, and Purdy play action. They get a nice big explosive. So I agree with you. It's all result-oriented analysis, and I find it to be totally tacky to have this conversation. It just feels like, okay, I need something to be mad at. I need something to blame. So let's blame this. Let's talk about this. And then
it's a fair discussion if it's Dwelly.
Right.
It's a fair discussion. Why? Because Dwelly is a borderline wide receiver. He is not a blocker. And I think Garoppolo might have gotten crushed one time because Dwelly missed a block. So yeah, if it had been Dwelly, I'm with you. But Kroft is their second tight end on the depth chart. He's done a good job blocking this year. He was known as a blocker more than a receiver coming out of Rutgers.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, it's like, should they have a better second tight end? Yeah. In fact, if it was up to me, I would try to maneuver in the draft and wind up with Notre Dame's Michael Mayer, because I really believe they need a second tight end. And I think Mayer could be a star tight end in their system, but they don't have that player right now. And they've got one star and 3 threes. and that's what happens. It's just a weakness in their roster.
Yeah, I agree with you. I actually look at Juszczyk in a lot of ways as a guy who fills the second tight end void. I feel like he does a decent job. They had him in line in 2020 quite a bit. They were getting away from having the fullback, traditional fullback there for a little bit. They had Juszczyk lining up in line quite a bit. They got away from that. So we'll see what they end up doing. But ultimately, Larry, we're gonna have this conversation all off season. I guess if you can make enough, if somebody can make some football points that make me change my mind on this, sure, I'm open to it. But right now, that's kind of where I stand. I don't have a lot else planned to talk about. I know we're known for doing these 2-hour shows on Tuesday nights where you and I just keep going on and on. Well, Kid Trickster's in my head too. He's telling me, Vish, stop talking. I already feel like I'm talking too much. But Larry, do you have any other things to say? You have anything else you have been thinking about the last couple of days?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I always look at personnel, right? So I'm
Okay.
always looking at the personnel side of things. There's a lot of key free agents here. You don't want to lose Jimmy Ward. Jimmy Ward is a vital piece on the back end. You don't want to lose Azeez Al-Shaair. Al-Shaair is your find. You found him as an undrafted player. He's a terrific young player. You don't want to lose him. That I think that's where for me, and when I'm looking at their off season, I'm thinking of those two guys specifically, Al-Shaair and Jimmy Ward. They got to find a way to re-sign those guys. And then to me, this game
Okay.
also
Can I disagree
revealed.
with you right away?
Go ahead.
Because I think those are two guys they should let walk. Al-Shaair, to me, he's really good. He brings something to their defense because he's so reckless. He runs and hits really well. I thought he played better last year than he played this year, to be honest. I thought he really came on last year. This year, I thought he was clearly the third best linebacker on their team, whereas last year, of course, Greenlaw was banged up. I thought it was kind of close between him and Greenlaw, who you really think is the better player. But I think they have a guy that you really like in Marcelino McCrary-Ball that might fit right into Al-Shaair's role, and I think Al-Shaair might go with D'Amico. And then in regards to Jimmy Ward, I just feel like with his age, and we know how good he is. This has nothing to do with who he is as a person or a football player, but just given his age and where his price would be, I think they're okay to let him walk. Let Diamador Lenore slide into nickel where you originally drafted him to play, or Sam Womack, depending on who you prefer and who has a better offseason. And I think they should re-sign Emmanuel Mosley. I think he should take first precedent over those two guys, actually. Not to interrupt you there, Larry, but that would be my take on that.
Too. Don't get me wrong. I like Mosley, but I'd have to work him out and see what he looked like. Because he had a major injury and he's been in the league a while, and who knows? I mean, I'm not sure how he's going to recover from his injury.
Okay, fair enough. To
me, Jimmy Ward and Azeez Al-Shaair are a couple of the guys who give this defense swagger. And that's what defenses need. They need swagger. They need when you roll out there on the field, the other team goes, oh shit, look at these guys. And Azeez is one of those guys, and Ward is definitely one of those guys. So I think the Ward to me is a culture player, and I don't think he's lost a step. And he's so trustworthy. He can run every spot, nickel, strong safety, free safety, outside corner. He can do it all. And then Azeez, I know there's Marcelino, but isn't Flanagan Fowles or Burks free agents too? I think so. I
think DFF is, but to be honest, Larry, I haven't been too impressed with DFF when he's actually been playing. I think Burks is kind of firmly set in as a backup player, who can play, spot duty as the third linebacker and plays core special teams. McCrary-Ball, to me, showed kind of the recklessness and a little bit of the speed that's a little bit different that Al-Shaair and Greenlaw both, I would say, have in spades, even more than Warner, where it's just this end-to-end speed and recklessness with your body. Flanagan Fowles, to me, is nowhere near as physical as those two guys. I think McCrary-Ball showed a little bit more of that physicality where he could end up ultimately taking that job, I feel like.
And then of course the draft, you got to look at the draft for linebackers, and there's a bunch of good ones in this upcoming draft that I can't wait to see. I mean,
right.
One of my favorite players is DeMarvion Overshown. I don't know.
I love the name.
Yeah. DeMarvion Overshown for Texas is just terrific. I mean, he is really, really good. And he's 6'4", but he's like 220, and he really flies around and makes a lot of plays. I like him as a linebacker. But to me, those are the guys that I've got to see come back. As far as the front, this game showed that Kinlaw is a bust, and they have to figure out a way, either cut Kinlaw, trade Kinlaw. They gotta get away from Kinlaw, because they were Bosa's a difference maker. Ebukam's got a crazy motor. Armstead is still playing at a really high level, but Kinlaw just got moved at will. And Givens a little bit got moved as well. And McGill's more of a, he's more of a gap penetrator. Kalia Davis will be interesting. I got to see what Kalia Davis looks like next year. But you got to find, to me, the number one need on defense, more so than anything on the back end, is you got to find, the same way the Niners found Bryant Young in the 94 draft, they got to find a Bryant Young now to
Larry,
go next
he was a
Eric
top
Armstead.
10 pick.
I know, but I'm just saying, I mean, you don't have to have a top 10 pick, but you got to find a difference maker up front, either in free agency or the draft. Kinlaw's not it. You saw it. Functional. Is he strong? Yes. Is he functionally strong? No. You can't win with that. You cannot win with it. He was such a liability that it forced them to suit up an extra tackle. And for that reason, Drake Jackson never was active in the last month. So you can't allow that anymore. Kinlaw's they got to upgrade from Kinlaw. I hate to say it, because I like Kinlaw, but he's just not the guy.
He had a rough playoffs. Okay. There's no doubt about that. I think people are getting too much on him for what happened last week. He's turned into a scapegoat. He had a rough playoffs in general. He didn't play too hot against Seattle. He did not play that well against Dallas either. Okay. I'm going to also give him the benefit of the doubt, because there was some reporting with his knee that the 49ers didn't even expect him to come back, but he really wanted to come back and play. Now, that brings up the other can of worms with him in that conversation. Is he ever going to be healthy? Is that knee ever going to be right? Because I've always held out this one thing for him, and I've always agreed also it's my pre-draft bias, because I think the player is so talented. But I've always held out the one thing that if he can go through a healthy offseason, actually train and work on his game, you might see the vast improvement we're hoping. He's never been able to train, because every offseason, all Javon Kinlaw does is rehab, because unfortunately his knee has not been cooperating. So that's the one thing I would say. And the other thing is, while I agree with you, Larry, it exposed the weakness within the interior of the defense. I think it wasn't just a Kinlaw problem. I think it is a Kinlaw problem in the sense that Kinlaw is the most likely person on this defense to offer a solution to it, and he didn't offer the solution. But there is a Kinlaw problem in the sense that they lost some size between Ridgeway and Mo Hurst. They lost some weight in their interior defensive line. And Givens is a smaller guy. T.Y. McGill is a smaller guy. And the Eagles' bigger, powerful offensive linemen between Jason Kelsey and Amani Solitalu, or however you pronounce his name, because I just completely screwed it up. The left guard, I'm blanking on his name. Who's their left guard in Philly?
Landon Dickerson.
Landon Dickerson, the guy from Alabama, right? Great player. So they were moving them in the run game, and I thought they exposed kind of the lack of size in the very interior of this 49ers defensive line that's not been replaced since, obviously, DJ Jones' departure to Denver. I don't think that's just a Kinlaw issue. You brought up Kalia Davis, Larry. I think they need to beef up the interior of the defensive line in general. I don't think it needs to be a Bryant Young player, but they need to have a guy that's kind of immovable that can really take on double teams and dominate. Because I thought Eric Armstead was very strong towards the end of the season. I thought he played very well against Philly. He's an awesome player. Bosa's very good. And then the other thing I actually think they need more, you said they need a dominant interior presence. I think they need an edge presence on the other side of Bosa. They need Drake Jackson to develop into that bendy edge speed guy that's going to be explosive and have the quarterback move forward into the pocket, where you can allow the Armsteads who push the pocket to collapse it around him. We'll see what they do, because I thought moving the defensive end inside, which is the new trend, right? They did it with O'Menahue. It works out where you don't need a Bryant Young, because you just need a two-down player on first and second down who can really dominate in the run game, because you can find another Omenihu type as a smaller interior player, an Arden Key type, and continue with this because it gives you better rush versatility and it gives you more athleticism to run down these mobile quarterbacks. But more than having a Javon Kinlaw type player, because I think they can find some size and a beefy interior defensive lineman to pair with Kinlaw, to pair with Kalia Davis later in the draft. To me, they need to find an edge presence, whether it's Drake Jackson, whether it's bringing back Ebukam in some capacity, whether it's something, they need to find an edge presence that causes, the game to shift a little bit, where you can't just come into the entire game against the 49ers defense and say, we have a blocking plan for Nick Bosa. And if we do, they're going to get pressure on us, but nobody else is going to really make that one game-changing play. Though, to be fair, Omenihu did make the play against Dallas. So I can't just fully say that, even though it's pretty much the case, because Omenihu did make that play.
I'll say, I like the Niners' other defensive ends. I like Omenihu. I like Jordan Willis. I like Drake Jackson. I think they're fortified there. They could add another guy for sure. And you always can use a dynamic pass rush. But the 49ers were bottom third of the league in, short yardage defense. They weren't good in short yardage. And Kinlaw doesn't make any plays.
He didn't help it. He didn't help it by coming back.
He didn't make any plays. He just didn't make any plays. He played at the beginning of the year. He played in the Seattle game. He made one tackle. He played in the Denver game. He made one tackle. He played on Christmas Eve then against Washington. He made one tackle. And he played against Arizona at the end of the year. He made one tackle. He never had a game in the regular season where he made more than one tackle. He never had a game in the regular season where he sacked the quarterback. He never had a game in the regular season where he forced a fumble. He never had a game in the regular season where he recovered a fumble. He never had a game in the regular season where he intercepted a pass. Do you see what I'm saying? He didn't.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
He didn't do a whole lot.
Right.
So, you know what? He looks awesome. And there's no question he's menacing and he's strong. And if you talk to the linebackers, they'll tell you, hey, he is strong and he will keep bodies off of us. But they just need more. They need more because Givens is more of a gap shooter, and so's T.Y. McGill.
Right.
And so's Kerry Hyder's just really more of a glorified, he's just a combo. He can't play inside very, very long. He's more of a defensive end. So they needed to play Kinlaw, and he needed to play well. Well, they played Kinlaw, and he didn't play well.
See, so my thing with that, Larry, though,
what are they going to do?
I feel like you and I also have mentioned that he didn't play well. We talked about it right here on a Tuesday after the Seattle game, and we talked about it after the Dallas game. At this point, I feel like we're just piling on because, he was a problem in the Philadelphia game as well, but he's also the 8th or 9th thing when we're talking about the list of problems of what went wrong in the Philadelphia game for the 49ers team. And I don't think that weakness of size is just a Kinlaw issue, Larry, because again, like you mentioned with the tight ends, it's also a personnel issue in this defensive line. Givens does not offer that ability to just take on double teams and be that big guy that just is a menacing presence that just doesn't move and keeps the linebackers free to come in.
But Kinlaw's not either.
And does that. Kinlaw hasn't been doing that, but I'm saying this problem exists beyond Kinlaw because McGill and Givens don't offer solutions. Kinlaw is the most likely, like I said, to offer a solution here, even though he hasn't been offering that. But this problem needs to be solved, and I think it can be with Kalia Davis, and I think you can find a big guy who does a DJ Jones type job later in the draft, Larry. What they do need, in my opinion, is another edge presence, preferably one with speed and bend on the other side of Bosa. I thought that was very, very important. I feel like, they just need a 2-down player for what you're talking about, Larry, because third downs, they can shift a defensive end, a bigger guy inside and do what they did with Omenihu, do what they did with Arden Key. But in order to be successful rushing, obviously on third downs and stuff, especially without Bosa in the playoffs, they're going to need either Drake Jackson to step up and him become that guy, or they're going to have to find a guy, whether that's spending a lot of money to find a way to get a Yannick Ngakoue or something like that. They're going to have to find a specialist, to me, on the other side of Bosa that can really, really change the game. Because to me, Larry, even if they weren't a good third and short defense, which they weren't good, we thought it was Armstead and Kinlaw weren't there, and they didn't really get better at it once Kinlaw got back, right? They struggled third and short versus Dallas too. I agree with you 100%, and Kinlaw has not played well. I'm not going to sit here and defend him by saying he doesn't play. He's played well, even though I think he has the capacity to play well. But given all of that, I don't know if that was the biggest issue on this defensive line as much as I thought that not having a dominant edge, or not even a dominant presence, somebody that was constantly creating disruption on the edges outside of Nick Bosa all year. They didn't have that.
I mean, I like those other guys. So I guess I will just disagree. I like those other guys, and as long as you have those other guys, I feel pretty good about things. I like Amenahue. I like Jordan Willis. I like Ebukam. I like Drake Jackson. I mean, think about that right there. I mean, there's 4 defensive ends right there. And Willis a free agent. I think so's Amenahue.
Yeah,
So
Omenahue, I think Omenahue is gonna be Arden Key from last year. I think he's the one that's
you
gone
can
for
move on. He
sure.
might go. I
Yeah.
could see him going back
He's
to the
gonna get paid a
Texans.
lot. I agree, Larry, and I think he's gonna get paid handsomely to do it. I've had this question up for a while. Calvin S. Hobbs says, so we're going back to the quarterbacks, Larry, and injuries and Kyle. I'm sure you haven't talked about that enough over the last 3 days. So here's more for you. 6 years with Kyle, but only 1 year with a healthy quarterback at the end. Multiple injuries this year and last. Mullins with the same injury as Brock. If Kyle treats quarterbacks as replaceable cogs, this is what happens. Wow, Larry. Wow, 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 wow.
I mean, it is, it's not about Kyle. I mean, Kaepernick played half the games before Kyle arrived. Gabbert played the other half. It's just the reality is that there was a ton of quarterbacks used around the league, and the defenses are faster. They're rushing quarterbacks with smaller, faster guys. They're getting home, and quarterbacks are getting hurt more. I don't think there's anything really that surprising. I do agree with the notion that you kind of need to draft a quarterback every year. I think it's a good practice just because of the value, how valuable they are. I mean, look at Brock Purdy. The Niners wanted to trade Brock Purdy right now, despite the fact he's got the injured elbow. They would get a whole lot more than a 7th round draft choice. So, just on value alone, there's some value in that. So, we'll see. I don't, I once again, what is your argument that Kyle is getting his quarterbacks hurt, that Kyle doesn't believe in pass protection? I think that if you want to talk about this and have an intelligent discussion about this, let's talk about it for real. Really what happened is they prioritized the defensive line over the offensive line, drafted Solomon Thomas. Solomon Thomas was a bust. So then they had to draft another defensive lineman, and another defensive lineman, and another defensive. So they've gone defensive line, and they've had to overdraft. This is what teams that miss in the draft have to do. When you miss in the draft, and you're prioritizing defensive line play, you got to keep drafting guys there. So that's what they've done, and that's why they drafted Kinlaw. They probably should have drafted Wirfs, but they drafted Kinlaw because Solomon was a bust, and so they went for need. And anytime you go for need over the best player available, you lose. And they've gone for need in the defensive line, and they've lost a few times. They hit on Bosa, but he was the 2nd pick in the draft. It was hard to miss. They've gotten
I don't
great
think they would have picked Wirfs, Larry. I'm just saying that in terms of what they look for in offensive linemen, and as physically gifted as Wirfs was coming out, if there was one weakness with Wirfs, it was his initial foot quickness, right? He has special speed, absolute mauler, crazy athlete, started all those games, whatever, but he didn't have maybe the special foot quickness, and he went to a great scheme, right? A lot of man-on-man blocking, a lot of gap scheme. Bruce Arians loves running duo, which is the most classical, inside run play for a gap scheme, man-on-man run scheme. So I think in a lot of ways, Larry, as much as we can bring up Wirfs, I'm not sure that Wirfs would have really been in consideration given what the 49ers look for in their tackles. Not to change the conversation or interrupt you, Larry, because I do think ultimately Wirfs looks like he's a Hall of Famer at right tackle, and they missed out. But I'm just saying, at the time, if we're going to take the lens and look back at the time, while
I think they had a lot of interest.
Kinlaw was a compensation. I don't know if Wirfs would have been the tackle they would have liked.
Wirfs was the tackle that was staring him in the face. So
that's true.
They needed an offensive tackle, and they still need an offensive tackle. So we'll see. I mean, I think Wirfs would have been better than McGlinchey. If you had Wirfs, you probably would have a better situation than you have right now. I mean, what could you have now? McGlinchey was a top 10 pick as a right tackle.
Right.
He's likely to walk in free agency. And Kinlaw was a top 20 pick at defensive tackle,
Right.
and he can't get on the field. And when he can't get on the field, he doesn't get a lot done.
Yeah.
So it's they're in a bad spot there. To me, the big issues are offensive tackle because of how much they cost, right? You can't get an offensive tackle for the most part in the 7th round.
Right. Right.
But you can't, he's a first round, second round deal, and they don't have a first or second round pick. But it's offensive. Once again, they're staring at offensive tackle versus defensive tackle, and we'll see what they do. Seems like they always choose defensive tackle over offensive tackle, but maybe they'll go free agency for one of those to fill one of those needs.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you from that standpoint, Larry. Like, right tackle is obviously going to be a massive need. I'm going into this offseason. The conversation about protection, I guess we can talk about it, but the thing is, I think across the league, line play is just not good in general, right? Like Jalen Hurts got hurt this year, and that's probably one of 2 or 3 lines in the NFL that you would say is truly elite, both in the run and the pass game, right? The rest of them, you say they probably major in one. Most of them suck in general, right? Like the Bills have a horrible offensive line. That was a playoff team. The Bengals had a mediocre offensive line, and then they all got hurt, and it turned into a horrible offensive line. That was a playoff team. The Bucs had a terrible offensive line. That was a playoff team. Really, when you stack it up in the NFC, besides Philadelphia and maybe Dallas, the Niners' offensive line was really as good as anybody in the NFC. Philadelphia also had a generational pass rush, right? We can't overreact to a game against a team with 70 sacks on the season on the road, right? They had 70 sacks, right? That's a historic number. And then the quarterback injuries, I agree. There's been a pattern of it with the 49ers. It's hard to miss that pattern, and it's hard to disagree with that pattern. But somebody's got to give me an example of what they are doing different, Larry, that's getting these quarterbacks hurt. You know what I'm saying? Like, are they running plays that are not being run by the rest of the NFL? No. Are they doing something with their quarterback that the rest of the NFL is not doing? No. And that's where I get frustrated, Larry, when I get into this conversation, because I find difficulty in objectifying this situation and being able to talk about it. Like, I can say that the pattern exists and it's easy to exist, but I can't tell you why the pattern exists, Larry. And if I can't tell you why the pattern exists, how are we supposed to just have this conversation? Because we need to give the reason, right? If we're going to say that Shanahan causes injuries because all these quarterbacks are getting injured, we have to be able to give the reason why he's causing the injury. Is it the system? Is it the play action? What is it that's causing the injuries? It's been all different. All kinds of different situations for these quarterbacks, Larry. It's been all kinds of different situations for these quarterbacks and how they've gotten injured, to be honest. And honestly, Larry, in my lifetime, I've always felt like the best quarterbacks, and I think a self-preservation thing is a part of it. And this isn't an insult to any of the quarterbacks that have played for the 49ers. And this isn't even a credit or a defense of Shanahan for the fact that these quarterbacks have gotten injured. But to me, in my lifetime, the best quarterbacks always find a way to suit up on Sunday and be healthy enough to play. They protect themselves on the field. They protect themselves off the field. And there is a little bit of a self-preservation aspect to it too, where, you know, all the great quarterbacks usually are also great because they started so many games in a row and were so successful for so long.
I mean, yeah, the good ones can negate the great pass rush by getting the ball out quick. Nobody gets the ball out quicker than Tom Brady. He's 46 and he got sacked 22 times all year.
Right. 0 times against the 49ers.
The one thing I see is that there's some teams that are like the Eagles, and they've got such powerhouse players in the middle of their line. So in this case, Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, Jordan Davis, who's maybe the biggest guy there is in the entire league.
Right.
Linval Joseph.
Sue.
All right, when you have that much beef up front, then guess what? In the play action game, you can just tell your ends, you know, you feel so confident about your ability to play the run with your incredible size up front that you just tell your outside guys, don't even worry about reading run, just attack the edges. And so when you're in that mindset where you're no longer reading run or pass, you're just getting around the corner and up the field and towards the quarterback. And so the play action fake has zero effect on you. And in reality, it just gives you a half second more to get to the quarterback. So I think that's really what we saw this year with Philly, is that they got such big bodies across the middle that they just said on the outside, Hassan Reddick, who cares about what you do against the run? Just shoot up the field and attack the quarterback. And teams and the Niners knew that. The numbers against the Eagles, as far as the Eagles' numbers against play action pass this year were tremendous. So the fact of the matter is, on the pass where Purdy got hurt, it was a play action fake, and he held the ball for 3.7 seconds.
Right.
And
7-step
the
drop.
combination, and he didn't step up in the pocket. And that's ultimately what happened. So he should have known he's going up against a defense that wasn't reading play action pass with the ends. They're just shooting up the field. And so you got to carry your play action fake, and you got to hurry up your clock that much more. And he probably should have gotten rid of that ball in 2.4. Instead, he's holding it at 3.7, and his season ends, and their season ended. So that's what I saw there. Not every team can do that. Not every team can do that, because not every team's got enough beef up front to not need their ends to play the run. Usually you need your ends to play the run.
I think those 2 points are the most important points. First of all, in terms of self-preservation and protection for a quarterback, I mean, Brady, Manning, Breeze, these guys protected themselves by always being on time and on schedule. And Purdy was a hair late, right? If he still releases the ball there and has time to release the ball, he probably gets away with it, and it's probably not a problem. But he was still a hair late, and it's unfortunate that he got hurt. But the second part of it, to me, Larry, is the point that I don't think is being talked about enough. We're talking about one of the greatest defensive lines in NFL history. I mean, Larry, list these names. When you look at the edge players between Josh Sweat, who's really good, Brandon Graham, who's phenomenal, one of the greatest Eagles pass rushers ever, Robert Quinn, who, had 18 and a half sacks last year, is an all-time great player, right? Has had multiple 15 and 15 plus sack seasons in his career. You go down the list of Cox, who's a special player, was a special player. Hargrave is an interior player with 11 sacks this year. Jordan Davis is an absolute stud as a rookie. Sue is still a presence.
Milton Williams.
Milton is right. He's good. You go down the list. Linval Joseph still gives him something. That defensive line is truly one of one. Like, look, this guy's bringing up Gurman Pada. Thank you. He's bringing up the Chiefs' offensive line is top 5. This just isn't true. The Chiefs' offensive line is top 5, quote unquote, based on pass block win rate. They're also a great example with 2 tackles of what happens when you have a quarterback who has such great feel for pressure, such an amazing ability to throw with people around him, and such an amazing ability to extend the play. The interior of the Chiefs' offensive line is phenomenal. It'll be fun to see how they match up, because it's better than the 49ers, right? Between Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, and Joe Tooney, that's better than what the 49ers have on the interior. But I'd take the 49ers tackles over Zeus Brown, who's been horrible this year. Zeus Orlando Brown, he's been horrible. He made the Pro Bowl for reasons God only knows. But of course, we found out Tyler Huntley was a Pro Bowler today too. So that tells you what you need to know. And then Wiley's not very good either. And so it's a great example of how the quarterback sometimes mitigates that. It's not all a quarterback issue. It's not all an offensive line issue. It's not an all a Kyle issue. But sometimes things can't necessarily be attributed to somebody's doing something wrong. It can just be, well, situationally, things didn't go exactly right for us. But Amit507 says, why didn't Hoof ask Kyle to challenge the 4th down play? He was standing right there. Larry, what do you have to say about that?
I didn't see it. I didn't see I didn't see emotion or what he did. I just heard that he motioned. I don't know. I mean, if he did motion, Kyle didn't see it. If Kyle saw it, did he think that Hufanga was wrong? I just think that it was so early in the game that Shanahan's thought process was, I'm not going to challenge and lose my timeout early in the game and this and that. But once he had both Hufanga waving it off and Devontae Smith running to the line, that's 2 indications he should have thrown the flag. He wasn't as aware as he should have been. I totally disagree with Ross Tucker, who went on 95.7 The Game today and said that Sirianni coached circles around Shanahan. I don't buy that at all. But Shanahan missed that call. There's no doubt. And he had two. Now, the league could have caught it. The guy in the booth could have caught it. There we go. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, nobody ever talks about that. They don't need Shanahan does not have to challenge that.
The Sky Judge
has an ability, but didn't. So it was all left on Shanahan, and he didn't do it. And I understand why he didn't do it, because you're kind of waiting for the game to settle in and you're maybe a little rocked back on your heels. But, Steve Young told me Friday night that he was talking about Brock Purdy, but it applies to Shanahan as well, that in these games, the margins are so small between these great teams that you have to start the game full throttle, full ready. Absolutely. You can't, there's no easing into it. And I felt like Shanahan kind of eased into it. And unfortunately, did not recognize two indicators that there was something wrong, or at least didn't recognize it in time, or didn't want to challenge. I think it had to do with where it was in the game. It was so early in the game. He wasn't ready, but it was a mistake. It was a mistake. There's no way around it. I don't see how anybody can say otherwise. It was clearly a mistake. He didn't, it wasn't like there were no indications. There were multiple indications. Doesn't mean that nobody in the booth, could have caught it for them, but nobody caught it, and it wound up being a huge impact on the game. Now, as far as what does that mean, you never know, because if the Niners get the ball there, who knows how the game gets called? Who knows if Purdy goes out? You don't know. But just the way it happened. But it was Shanahan's fault. I mean, I don't see I haven't heard anything from anybody that would say, it really has nothing to do with Kyle. He's running the game. He's got it there in front of him.
Yeah.
He elected not to challenge. But it's also a damn shame because, we're talking about the NFL number one nightmare is that there's erroneous touchdowns in the postseason, and you can make an argument. Forget an argument. If that ball was ruled to hit the ground, it's 49er ball. It was fourth down. So that was it was a bad weekend for NFL refs for sure.
So I agree with you first and foremost, right? I agree with your reasoning, but I also agree Shanahan's in the wrong. You got to be on top of that at that point in the game. You got to be ready to go, and you have to be managing the game in that situation. I also thought Fox and the NFL completely blew it. First of all, the Sky Judge is supposed to have access to every single replay angle without Shanahan being, right?
They have their Hawkeye in that situation,
he should have all those angles, which Fox didn't show us. And that's where I thought Fox really screwed up, because they only showed us the replay angle after Philly had scored the touchdown when it become useless. But the Sky Judge should have had that angle.
He did have
overturned it then
it's not should have.
And he
didn't
do it. And that's we can blame Shanahan, and he does deserve blame. He was wrong. There's no doubt about it. But the NFL screwed the pooch on this one. Yeah. The Sky Judge should have overturned this one. Shanahan shouldn't have had to use a challenge, and the Niners should have gotten the ball. Who knows how the game would have been different? I don't know. Maybe it would have been different. Maybe Purdy doesn't get hurt. We can play the entire hypothetical game, but we're really analyzing one part of the game that turned out to be a little bit moot, because what happened, 6 plays later subsequently, which pretty much ended the game, right? But even then, I agree with you. This was Shanahan's fault. He screwed it up. But ultimately, I also think Fox screwed it up, and I also think the NFL screwed it up. And I thought the NFL had an absolute mess of an officiating weekend on Sunday.
Okay, let's talk about this for a second. It's ultimately Shanahan's responsibility, okay? But there's a big difference between saying it's ultimately Shanahan's responsibility and Shanahan screwed it up. There's not 2 options here. There's 3 options here. It's Shanahan's responsibility, and he's the head coach, and the buck stops with him, and it got screwed up, and he has an impact on it, so he's got to own it. But I didn't think anything of it when I saw the 2 angles that I saw in real time, and I think Shanahan didn't see the angle that we saw after the commercial until after the play as well. So I can't blame Shanahan for, if he's looking at the scoreboard and saying, well, or anybody who's watching, let's say on TV, because how does a head coach, Vish, make that call to challenge or not challenge?
He either has to bang, bang.
He has to see, but the reality is this is what's reality.
He has to be told either by the guy upstairs that he's seen something, throw the flag, or he had to have seen the replay physically. The guy that not every team has one guy that's job is literally to just stare.
Your own guy has to tell you, or you have to have seen it. But if your own guy,
the angle though, your own guy didn't get the angle. The Sky Judge should have gotten the angle. Why didn't he make the call?
Your own guy didn't see the angle that we saw afterwards in time. So the guy who's making a recommendation to him in his headsets is seeing what we're seeing on the couch, and he's saying, I don't see any reason to challenge it. Now, Shanahan, if he saw Hufanga and if he saw Devontae rushing to the line, I probably throw the challenge right there just on that. But even that, you have to have a level of awareness that he had to be on right in that moment at the beginning of the game. And he was settling into the game, and he wasn't ready for that moment. So I blame Shanahan, but I blame the NFL more. It's ultimately Shanahan's fault, but it was the NFL's F up because it was the guy who Shanahan was talking to and being advised by didn't see what the people in New York saw. And that's why the people in New York need to pause. Kevin Seifert for ESPN tweeted about this yesterday, saying that they can signal down to the officials on the field to pause. And they obviously didn't do that.
No, yes, absolutely, Larry. I 100% agree with you across the board there on everything you said. And the last thing I'll
people want to
say,
blame Shanahan. I don't know about that one either. You know what I'm saying? It's his
yeah,
responsibility, but he's not really to blame.
people are angry, Larry. I mean,
Yeah,
we have somebody saying 49ers didn't prepare Josh Johnson enough. They want a reason to blame because they want closure for this game, but sometimes, fate can be cruel. Only 1 out of 32 teams gets to do this. And then I see the people always saying the Niners are cursed, blah, 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 blah. No, they weren't cursed 5 different times when they went there. There's teams that are way more cursed than the 49ers where they've had a bunch of different, right, what are the lines? Exactly. But the last thing I want to leave this conversation with, Larry, and perhaps our show even, too, is in regards to obviously the challenging. You're absolutely right. You're right on everything I think you said across the board there. And then it's the Hufanga thing, right? Hufanga saying it's incomplete. If Shanahan challenged every time his defender signaled incomplete on a low pass or a high pass, well, he would lose both his challenges immediately, right? There was another great play. I thought it was Jalen Hurts' best play of the game. The Niners kind of pushed the envelope, and they brought a zero pressure. And Jalen Hurts actually drifts back in the pocket and throws a dig against zero pressure. Kind of crazy thing to do, kind of crazy thing to get the timing off, but he throws a dig. JT O'Sullivan actually breaks this play down. I saw it on Twitter as well. But he broke this play down, and he throws a dig, and it's a really low ball, and AJ Brown picks it off the ground. Whoever, I think it was Mooney Ward, who was covering AJ Brown on that zero pressure, immediately said it's incomplete. It's incomplete. When you watch the replay, it was a clear catch. Should Shanahan have challenged that one too? Because Mooney Ward said it was incomplete. I think that split-second reaction when he sees incomplete is not really a valid reason to say, oh, Hufanga said it, throw the challenge flag immediately. That went too fast. I think he, as you said, he has culpability. It's his responsibility, but the NFL ultimately was the one who screwed the pooch on it. But Larry, thank you so much. What a show, man.
And one other thing, the officials screwed up this game in other ways. Lane Johnson had multiple false starts. I don't want to hear about his quick twitch. He was moving before the snap. And ultimately he was moving on the sound of the quarterback's voice. But if you beat the snap, that's a false start.
Right.
And then the other one is the Josh Johnson fumble. That was a false start on the Niners that didn't get called. That play never should have happened. So this game leaves you with a really bad taste in your mouth. Why? Because the Devontae touchdown really shouldn't have been a touchdown. It should have been Niner ball. The fumble from Josh Johnson that should have been a dead ball before the fumble. Lane Johnson probably got an edge on Bosa, several times when he shouldn't have. I mean, there was a lot of questionable stuff in this game. So ultimately, I think the Eagles were the better team. And ultimately, and I really believe that. I think they had more talent. I thought the 49ers were going to win the game because I think Purdy's playing at a magical level and they're hotter. They were hotter than Philly. And I thought Philly was a little overrated. And I thought there were some things the Niners had could do to Philly that other teams couldn't do. But it wasn't going to come to pass after Purdy went down. And ultimately, we get the Andy Reid Bowl. And I like Kansas City, man. And I know a lot of people don't. A lot of people think Philadelphia's going to win this game.
Yeah,
I
I
think
like
Kansas City's going
Philadelphia.
to win this game. And I really like several of the players on Kansas City's back seven. And we'll see. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Unless Kansas City's just so banged up and I don't realize it. I like Willie Gay. I like Nick Bolton. I like the big boy up front. I like
Yeah, the big boy up front is special. He's one of one. He might be the best defensive player in the NFL right now.
He's great. He's a great player.
Yeah.
Every time they need a big play from Chris Jones, he delivers a big play.
Right.
And obviously Mahomes and Reed and Pacheco with his 4.3 speed and McKinnon and I love their interior of their offensive line, and I know their tackles. Wiley's kind of and Orlando's not having a great year, but
Juice Brown is bad, man.
I'll take KC. I'll take KC.
Okay, I mean, we'll have more time to talk about this one, obviously, Larry, both on your channel, Mr. 13K, and on my channel as well. But this was awesome. As always, it's a pleasure to have you on. This conversation is always really good. I wish we could keep going on because I honestly have a lot more to say, but it's 11 o'clock here, and I do have to catch some Z's and before my workday tomorrow. But Larry, as always, thank you so much for coming on. Please like, subscribe, and share, everybody. It's always a pleasure to do this with Larry. We will be back, I think, Thursday, right, Larry, on your channel?
Thursday night we'll have you on, and we'll talk
go.
more about Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch should address the media tomorrow in Santa Clara. I think I may go to that. And yeah, looking forward to it, man. Thursday night on the Krueger Show.
Thursday night. Did you go to the locker room today?
You know what? I didn't. I would have, but I didn't. I looked at it last night at midnight, and it didn't say media availability. And then this morning at like 9 or 10, they put it up there, and there was availability at 11:30. By the time I saw it, it was 11 o'clock, so I didn't have enough time to get down there.
Okay. So
kind of bummed too.
I
would have liked to have seen some of the guys.
Missed you, yeah. But anyway, Larry, thanks as always, and we'll see you guys next time.